Hey guys, in this video I'm going to talk about finding inspiration for your photography. So I'm Daniel Norton, photographer here in New York. I make videos like this and about technique. If you guys are interested, go ahead and subscribe for more videos like this, and let's get to it. So I've mentioned before that I don't typically look to other photography for my inspiration. I never have. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, I think actually, especially when you're first starting, and maybe I did when I was very first starting, you want to look at photographers because you want to be a photographer. You want to see what people are doing. You know, what is photography? What's happening? But I think that many of us rely too much on that, right? So we're looking at Instagram, we're looking at, Flickr or whatever, Pinterest, and we're looking at that as a source of like what I should do with my work, right? That's like many positions people take. So you're looking at people using smoke bombs, or they're doing, whatever technique or this and that, and you emulate that because you like it. You see it, you like it. The only problem with that, following trends as it would be, is that you'll never be the one to set the trend if you're always following trends. If you look and you go, oh, right now, everybody's using blue, so I'm going to start shooting with blue, it's already over. By the time everybody's doing it, it's over, right? And it's tricky and maybe even a little scary to be a trendsetter, right? To like do something outside the box, to do something different, because people might hate it, right? But you'll never be that person that sets the trend if you just do what other people are doing. So looking at other photography, especially modern photography, stuff people are doing right now, will actually kind of box you in kind of a bad way, I think. So one thing we need to do as creatives is we need to, seek out originality, and we do that by looking, into ourselves and gaining knowledge and also inspiration from various sources. And again, if it's copying type sources, which is fine. I don't want to make it sound like you shouldn't do that. I mean, if you see a trend going on, you like it, go for it. I mean, it's not going to hurt you. But you don't want to be about that, right? You should know what's going on. So when you're doing commercial type photography, if that's your endeavor, when somebody's like, oh, I want that thing that's really popular right now, you can do it because you can see it and do it, whatever. But that shouldn't necessarily be the basis of your style, because it's not your style, it's somebody else, right? You're copying somebody else. If you look towards, even if you look towards like old masters, which I don't know, they could be that old photographers, somebody like Avedon that I really love, or like Herb Ritz, or, some of these people, you can look and say like, oh, I really like what they brought to photography. But if you start copying their style exactly, if you start copying exactly what they did without understanding why they did that, what you're going to do is you're going to create kind of a blank, boring image in the long run. What you want is an image to have a lot of feeling and a lot of emotion, and you get that through you really finding something in that image that you want to put out there. So we need to like think beyond the actual image and more towards like, what do people feel when they look at this image? What do they feel when they observe a series of images? I mean, do they see something? Are you telling a story? And to me, one of the best ways to get inspired by that is reading, right? So I mentioned before music, and I think I talked once about that. When I say I'm inspired by music, not generally listening to like, oh, I like the beat of this and it motivates me to do something. Sometimes when I'm shooting a musician, I'll do that. I'll listen to their music and try to like envision like what the actual sound of the music does to me to think about how I want to shoot them. But when I'm talking about music, I'm talking about the lyrics of the music, especially songs that tell stories, songs that paint a visual picture. Those are the ones where I can close my eyes and listen to that lyric and be like, I see something. And when you listen to that lyric, you see something different, right? People interpret things differently, even if it's a very simple line that can't really be misinterpreted. You remember things differently. If it's referencing, your best friend in second grade, your best friend in second grade was not my best friend in second grade. We didn't grow up in the same place. We didn't grow up in the same time period. Well, I guess there might have been like 30 kids that grew up in the second grade. Well, anyways, my point being is that it's all different, right? So I think that finding inspiration through words and then thinking about what that picture is in your brain really is going to help motivate you. So one of the things, like I said, that I use a lot is books. And I've been reading a lot the last few years. I'd kind of taken a break, I'll say, life happens. And when I was younger, I used to read a lot. And I realized that I was not reading, so I kind of put myself in a situation where I said, I'm going to read. And now I try to always keep a book with me, and I try to always read. And I found that actually, what I'm talking about in a little bit, I am enjoying some of the older stuff, like stuff that was written, I mean, not super old, I suppose, 1910 through like the 60s, 70s. Because I think that at that time, a lot of the things we see now as cliche or the way that people do things were created, right? They were creating genres a lot of times back then. So you look at something, and if you're reading it now, like you might be like, oh, I know what's going to happen here. But back then they didn't. It was something completely new. And I think that's really interesting to see that history of it, right? Because again, when you see the history of something, you see the original. Sometimes when you look at the original of something, it's not as good, maybe to your taste, as the modern version, because the modern version, of course, has been synthesized down to what we like right now. But it's interesting to see where they were coming from. Sometimes when it's being synthesized, you lose some of the original intent that the author had, or maybe that people in the time period saw. So reading this like older stuff is quite interesting. Also, I love that they, especially in sci-fi, they're like flying from planet to planet, but computers still take up an entire room, which I think is kind of funny because, I've got a phone, let's see. Anyways, you understand. So, everybody has different taste. I'm not going to throw out a lot of things, but one thing that inspired me to talk about this particularly today was I picked up this again, which I haven't looked at in a bit. It's one of the first books I picked up when I started reading heavily again, which is the Dying Earth series by Jack Vance. And the reason why I want to talk about this in particular, besides it being very good, is that Jack Vance writes in a way that nobody talks, really. And I remember very specifically when I was kind of being taught creative writing and stuff in high school and that kind of stuff, they were like, what you should do is write the way that you speak. Like that was a new thing. People were looking at it like, don't be snobby with the literature, like write stuff that people can understand in your voice. But Vance doesn't do that. And that I think is great. I know that there's a word for it. I probably should have Googled it. You can Google it and tell me in the comments below about, there's a phrase that writers use when you use big words just to use them, and it's kind of considered negative these days. I disagree. I think that using language that makes people think about what you're saying, I mean, obviously it has to still be good, but that's just not in and of itself bad. I think that stretching people and making them think and use words in different ways is really powerful to help paint a picture beyond what regular language does. And I think that's important when we're talking about what I'm talking about today, which is inspiration, right? So you're the way that they describe a room or a person or the way they act is just very interesting and different than you would today. And I think that again comes from a different direction. When something's being described in a very kind of poetic way, that gives you a lot more license to imagine it. I mean, if you think about somebody like H.P. Lovecraft never describes anything. It's always like these adjectives that kind of don't mean anything a lot of ways. I shouldn't say never, but it's very common for especially the horror parts where he never really explains what it is. You're just kind of like, and that's because your brain is much more scary than what he could think up, right? So this ties into photography a few different ways. One is that, like I said, I often seek my inspiration, or when I'm reading something, I'll like imagine a scene. So tying into that, the other thing that I'm always doing is I'm always looking for light. So this is important because if you want to recreate the vision, that you see in the book, you need to understand light. You need to see light in interesting ways. You need to be aware of light, because. So I'll give a little example. So this past weekend I was doing a workshop in my studio. We do that if you're interested. If you're ever in New York or you didn't know I do that, reach out, because I do them every once in a while. We do like hands-on workshops, myself and Seth. And at one point we were setting up some lighting, or Seth was taking charge and he was doing it. And I noticed this really weird and interesting light. It was kind of like, it was like a little rectangle of light, and it had like a kind of a corona around it. And it was super interesting. It was very warm, and it was coming through the window somehow, but it was only this one little area of light, and it was so interesting to me. And I'm like a cat, like trying to figure out, where it is and where it came from, and completely distracted, But the thing is, that light is in my brain now, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, that's so interesting. How can I use that in a shot? And I'm going to, because I thought it was just a beautiful pocket of light that was created by nature that I can now use to create something, when I envision or I have an idea about something that I want to make. So you got to put those two things together, right? It's super important. You can't just read and then imagine it and then not be able to create it, right? You need to also be able to put together these things technically, which of course we talk about a lot. But the idea that you're seeking out these images in your brain and you're trying to... Now, I should also say this. I'm not one, and again, there's nothing wrong with this if you do this. I'm not one to like recreate those scenes. Like I'm not going to dress somebody up in an outfit from the book and put them there like it's a scene. It's not my thing. I don't do that. People do, and they create awesome shots. There's lots of cool stuff like that out there. I don't create that kind of stuff. I more think about how it made me feel as the reader being there, right? Because I'm there in my head, right? So when something's described to me and it gives me a certain feeling, I think about how I'm going to use that to create that feeling in my work. Because, we go through life and you'll have a lot of feelings, I guess. I mean, things are going to happen to you in life and you're going to be happy, you're going to be sad, you're going to be whatever. But we don't, unfortunately, not all of us have the ability to travel everywhere, and see things, and see unusual things and meet unusual people. A lot of us don't travel that much at all and don't see things outside what we normally see in our everyday life. So if you have never been, let's say, out to the deserts in the Midwest of the U.S. and like looked up at the sky, and how blue it is, and the rock that's a kind of a warm, and this is like an amazing thing to experience. Not everybody can do that. So like reading, you kind of can, and it allows you to see it through somebody's eyes. Also, things that you have seen, and it's normal to you. It's sometimes interesting to see a character experience those things. You're like, especially if the author is really good, they're describing this character encountering this thing, and you're just like, whoa, what is that? It's so interesting. And then it's like, oh, it's a toaster, or whatever. It's like, because you wouldn't know if you've never seen a toaster before, right? You don't know what it is. So like, this is super interesting to somebody who's never seen it, and it kind of teaches you to have a new way of looking at things. And so that's why, I like to read for inspiration. The other place that I kind of look to, I also watch movies. Again, I do look at some photography. I also have more recently started reading comic books again, which I think is really interesting. I'm reading Barbarella right now. This is good. It's only a 12 issue. Again, I'm on number 12. Sad. Comics are interesting because they are super real, super over the top, unrealistic, right? They do lots of weird things, especially superhero comics. When I was a kid, I used to read Sergeant Rock. Anybody read Sergeant Rock? Let me know if you read Sergeant Rock. Sergeant Rock was the best when I was a kid. But anyways, superhero comics are really interesting. They draw people in really weird ways that don't exist, and they have these costumes that nobody could ever possibly wear in life. But they also kind of give you an idea of like, the unrealisticness of it helps you kind of see what can work and what can't work, and you can definitely garner a certain ideas from that. So, different visual mediums, go to museums, and that kind of stuff. It's super good, right? When you're a kid, I mean, I know I get a lot of viewers from all over the world, but like when you're a kid in the US, like you go, like when you're like a young kid, you go to these field trips and you go to museums and they make you stand in front of the art and you're like, oh, you don't really understand it. I mean, I went to art school, so I went to a lot more. As we get older, a lot of times people don't. I mean, I think city dwellers do. If you live in New York, probably you go to the museums quite a bit, because that's something we do a lot in New York. But I think a lot of people don't. They're like in the suburbs somewhere. There's no museum really close. There probably is. Like in my hometown, there's a little museum there. And whenever I go to visit, a couple times a year, because I don't change this exhibition that often, I'll pop in there. I'll pay the $5 or whatever it costs, the donation at the door. And it's interesting to see what this little museum or I guess it's a museum, has brought in as a collection. And they don't have a lot of like standing collections. They didn't bring them in because it's just different, right? It's really interesting. In fact, that was the first place I saw a huge giant Polaroid. They had life-size Polaroids back when, I don't know if you guys have ever seen these in person. Wow. And there's not that many of them in existence anymore because Polaroid is gone, right? Joe McNally did an amazing series with the giant Polaroid camera after 9/11. But I mean, they existed before then. Other people have used them. And it's so interesting, right, to see this instant image that's like life size. It's if you can ever see anything like that in person, it's definitely worth it. I believe that if you do a little Googling, which I should have, but I didn't think of it till right now, I think Joe's is now on exhibit. So if you're in New York, go see it. In any case, this video is about inspiration. I think that what we need to do is think about a couple of things. Find a source that's not just photography to inspire you, right? Whatever it might be. It could be movies, it could be reading, it could be comic books, it could be just sitting in the park and like watching people, interact in life. It could be doing anything, oftentimes I find some of my best inspiration for lighting, especially when I'm traveling, like on trains and stuff. I'll be on the train and some weird light will come through, or somebody will stand in the light a different way, or somebody will do this, there'll be some reflection, those types of things help inspire the lighting that I do. But being able to close your eyes, right, and imagine what it's like, what the feeling is, how it looks, how the light feels on the subject, how it reflects off of them, how that is, and then using that to create something is very, very powerful. And whether you get that from poetry, you get it from books, you get it from comic books, you get it from movies. Obviously, movies you can see it. You get it from music. All those things are great sources, and I think in the end, better sources, in my opinion, than looking at photography. I think when we look at photography, we tend to do things like, it generally makes us want to copy the photography. When we have to imagine it in our heads, then what we create in our mind is based on our personal experience, and our personal experience is what makes our work unique. You're unique, everybody's unique. Make your work unique, do something different, break the trend, set a trend, do the things that you really like to do. There's definitely photographers who have done things that, happens all the time, that, usually the ones that start the things, they created something, right, that other people are now following. And you could be that person. I mean, not to say that should be your goal, but you could be the person that comes up with something completely different. And that's powerful. It's powerful when you want to move your art forward, if the art is really what you're trying to do. And of course, if that's what you're trying to say. I mean, maybe what you're trying to say is just, I want to take pretty pictures and I'm just going to copy whatever's popular because I want likes. That's fine too. I'm not going to judge anybody if that's what you want to do. Then following trends is good. But even then, you need to be on the trend before it's too popular, because once it's too popular, again, everybody's doing it, right? So then you got to really watch those trends. You can look and be like, oh, okay, smoke bombs are popular, but how can I make that work with my style instead of just copying what everyone else is doing? So, hope that made sense. Kind of a little bit, as usual, all over the place. But, what I really want to know is, where do you guys get inspiration? And also, if you're reading any good books, let me know, because I'm always looking to read more books. Do you look at a lot of photography? Do you think that's really the best way? Or do you think I'm wrong? Like that's not the best way? Did I say it's not the best way? Do you movies? Like where is it that you get your inspiration for some of your ideas? Now, I'll also do a little footnote on this, that generally as a portrait photographer, a lot of my inspiration comes from the person that's there, right? That is kind of what we do as portrait photographers. We look at the person and we kind of like assess them and put out what we feel based on what they look like, what we want them to look like, and so on. But I'm talking about just ideas for concepts that you might want to do in general, and also for lighting, because I think that's super interesting, the way the sky, because here's the thing, right? If you take, I'm going to wrap up this one. So I was just reading the book. I'm not going to dig it out now while you're watching, but basically they were describing this desert area and how the sky was so intensely deep blue and blah, blah, blah. And if you think about that, you can create that, right? Because you can make the sky intensely deep blue by using a polarizing filter, by possibly using flash, with the sunlight to make the sky slightly darker. You can actually do that. You can create this thing. If you just took your camera and took a picture, it probably wouldn't be super intensely deep blue in the photo, because just the way that light balances, right? This doesn't happen naturally. So sometimes our eyes see things because our mind interprets them different than the camera, because the camera is only recording what's there. It doesn't know anything about your emotion or your feeling or how awesome it is to be there, right? So anyways, if you haven't already, please subscribe. Oh, also, never heard. Just so you know, I switched camera setups here. I'm using the Osmo Pocket because I got my Rode Labs to work with it. Maybe I'll make a little video about this. I've started to record some tech video, guys. They'll start to come out soon, where I'm just answering very briefly in videos the tech questions that I get tons of DMs. That way we can have those as like another little thing instead of these like longer format where I kind of discuss a topic. So we'll have more of that coming in 2020. We're coming into December now. It's cold. That's why we're inside. We're moving around a bit, so we'll see how that works out with this new portable system. Hopefully I'll be able to record more, to give more stuff to you. If there's something you want to see, Please let me know, make a comment below. If you have a tech question, make a comment or DM me so I can make some videos about that. And I'll see you next time.